It's time for this week's competitiveness feature, which is brought to you by Proudly SA as always. And today is World Intellectual Property Day, in case you didn't know. It's really there to celebrate the role of the creators and the inventors and the artists and their contributions to society and the economy, and how we can better protect that contribution through IP rights, patents and trademarks and copyrights and all of those things to help encourage and foster that self-same innovation and creativity. Now, this year the focus is firmly on digital creativity and IP, and what is the future of culture in the digital age? How can we create it? How can we access it? How do we finance it? How do we protect it? I think more importantly, because in this digital era, it's so easy to copy and paste and to share without attribution that we almost do it without thinking. So I've invited Hugh Melamdowitz, partner at Spoor Fisher, the IP gurus, to come and explain to us what our rights are when it comes to creative IP in the age of social media. Hugh, welcome.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Now, there are a lot of things you can do on the internet. I think users create and consume and distribute, and content is at the very core and center of all of this. How can we ensure that in today's world where practically anything can be downloaded and sampled, and I'm sure Game of Thrones has already been pirated well over 1 million times, what is the future for those that generate content and would like to benefit from that IP?
Well, I think the future is really pretty rosy. I think what the internet and the digital age has done is created new areas for marketing products, and I think it's critical for the creators to embrace those markets and to distribute their works within those markets. However, I think it's important for the creators to understand what they are letting themselves in for, and to understand the distribution channels that they are involved in. I think there's been a lot of argument that the present Copyright Act doesn't cater for the digital era, and to an extent perhaps that argument may have some credibility.
Yeah.
However, really what the Copyright Act does is prevents any reproduction in any form of a work. And as soon as one uploads or downloads a work on one's computer, that would constitute a reproduction. So theoretically, the Copyright Act does protect the creators of the works. But I think as with any work and in any medium that it's created, there's always going to be those who take advantage of the work, make copies of the work, and then distribute the work. And I think whether you're dealing with the digital age or you're dealing with hard copies, to be able to monitor and to enforce those rights is a challenge and does become rather difficult.
Well, we're talking about the creative industries, and I think George Martin will probably be making a fair amount of money from product placement through Game of Thrones to make up for what he loses on piracy. So I suppose it's also about being creative in the face of this digital sort of threat to one's established business model. But you mentioned the fact that the argument has been made that perhaps policy hasn't responded quite as quickly as it could have to this new era. How should law and policy respond?
Well, I think it needs to recognize that there's a digital era, and perhaps legislate for monitoring mechanisms that could perhaps be put in place. I think for me, perhaps the biggest difficulty relating to the digital era is streaming and where streaming fits in. And I think perhaps our Copyright Act needs to look at that. There was an innovative judgment in the United States dealing with streaming, which actually found it to be a broadcast. There were technical arguments around it, and the court took a pragmatic approach to streaming and found that it did constitute copyright infringement.
How does our law currently cater for streaming? It's very interesting that we've got Periscope, we've got apps that allow one to do live streaming, we've got video on demand. It's where everyone seems to be going. Yet our law seems to be once again on the back foot here.
Yeah, we would argue that it would probably constitute in the first place a broadcast.
Yeah.
And the argument would be that it's not received by members of the public, it's received by one member of the public, and therefore doesn't constitute a broadcast. I think that's quite an extension of the point, and I'm not certain that it really would have any validity. I think that it still needs to be tested, but that is an area that is of concern. The other argument could be that, because it does appear on my computer, even though it's not uploaded onto the computer, it could constitute a reproduction as well, but that may be stretching the point. I think really what we would look at is it being a broadcast.
Now, what are the implications for me as a user of that streaming service then? Does it come down to whether or not I should be paying a particular fee, a license fee, for example? I mean, how does that impact users?
Well, that's an interesting one, because it would be the broadcaster that would be obliged to pay the royalty the fee in these circumstances, not the end user. So the broadcaster should be seeking a fee from the end user.
Very interesting. Now, just before I let you go, if you had any top tips for people before sharing content from the internet, we're in the sharing economy and the sharing era. What's important to bear in mind on this World Intellectual Property Day?
I think treat your intellectual property in the same way as one would one's own privacy, one's own data. When you upload to YouTube, by way of example, understand what you're doing, understand what you're uploading to, and understand the terms and conditions. For example, on YouTube, you would be granting a license to the public to download your work and to reproduce your work. So just be very careful and understand the rules of the game in which you're playing.
Hugh Melamdowitz, partner at Spoor Fisher, talking about IP in the age of social media in this week's competitiveness feature, which is brought to you as always by Proudly SA. And coming up next, we'll have a look at the role of international philanthropic foundations, which are very much in the spotlight at the moment, certainly following comments from the State Security Minister in Parliament earlier today. Stay tuned.